Hey guys, Dim Gaming here, back with another gaming related video, and as the title of the video suggests, we're going to be talking about why, in my opinion, emphasis on my opinion, I think the 90s and early 2000s we were spoiled for choice with survival horror, and I still think it was the best era up until recently. No surprise, as you guys have known if you've been watching my videos consistently, I am in my mid-30s, so I was very much gaming in the 90s. That was kind of my first exposure to gaming, and I grew up in that era of gaming, and I think I'm very fortunate. Let's be honest, we were spoiled for choice. The original Resident Evil trilogy 1, 2 and 3 came out in the late 90s. They were the first survival horror games I ever got exposed to. Also as well, in the EU, we had Parasite Eve 2. I didn't know anyone that had a North America or Japanese version of Parasite Eve 1. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I don't think we got it in the EU, so I didn't actually get to play Parasite Eve 1 until a long time after. But yeah, Parasite Eve 2, the original Resident Evil trilogy, Dino Crisis 1 and 2, you know, the list goes on. For example, the game in the background, Deep Fear, came out on the Sega Saturn in 1997. I didn't actually play it until recently, but that still stands in that era. And of course, around the same time, 1999, we got Silent Hill 1, which is a phenomenal survival horror game. They all are. So that's just more of the most common survival horror games that people would have played in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, we had games such as Resident Evil Code Veronica, we had Resident Evil Outbreak 1 and 2, Silent Hill 2 and 3, the list does go on. I just think it was the best and most transformative era for survival horror. We got a lot of good survival horror games, and it definitely paved the way for what we have now, I think. Also, there were other good survival horror games such as The Thing and Cold Fear as well, but I haven't really played either of them, so I can't comment on how good they were. It's just something about that era, it always brings me back. I always go back and play the old Resident Evils, the old Silent Hills. I also go back and play the original Alone in the Dark games. They are the grandfathers of all of these. They came out in the very early 90s, and they are also fantastic. I'm sure we can all agree that old school FMV cutscenes in these games were really cool and really fun. The voice acting obviously got better over time. For example, Silent Hill 2's voice acting was a big step up from Silent Hill 1, and the Resident Evil 1 and 2, especially 1, the voice acting is trash, but you know, it was early then, so what do you expect? Also a disclaimer, I do love Resident Evil 1's voice acting. It just adds to the flair of that game, so I don't hate it, but it still isn't good by any means. I just think a lot of the older survival horror games were more stylized and more unique. If you look at some of the latest survival horror entries in 2024 and 2023, you have games like Alan Wake 2 and Alone in the Dark. Although both of those games are really fun, they have the same control scheme, they both have a very similar dodge and very similar game mechanics. Although the game stories and things you can do are different, they pretty much share that. Silent Hill 2 remake that's coming out, I don't know if it has a dodge the same, it does have one, but again, it's that same camera angle. The same with the Resident Evil 2, 3 and 4 remakes. 2 doesn't have a dodge, but 3 does. So they're starting to be a little bit less stylized in the control schemes. Yes, a lot more streamlined, but it takes away from the individual flair of these games, in my opinion. Let me know what you think about that point. However, without these classic survival horror games that I've mentioned, we wouldn't probably have got any remakes at all if they weren't as popular as they were. Survival horror as a genre is just my favorite. It really is. There's nothing else I get excited for more than a survival horror game. And there is still loads that I haven't played, and I'm discovering As I trawl through the internet, there's games like Chaos Break, Mizuma Falls classes as survival horror, I've been told. I don't think it looks like it, but it does. And there's things like that. I still haven't played Cold Fear either on PS2, as I mentioned that game earlier. So there is still loads to do. I'm also looking forward to playing Clock Tower and the Siren games. There's still so much to unpack. Yeah, I know a lot of later survival horror inverted commas games turned into action horror. It's nice when we get one of those franchises returning to survival horror. For example, I know some people didn't like Resident Evil 7, but I thought it was a true return to survival horror form for Capcom, and it was one of the coolest games of that year for me. Let me know what you think about Resident Evil 7 also. Overall, I think survival horror has grown dramatically from the early 90s, starting with Alone in the Dark, and then it had a bit of a peak in the early 2000s / late 90s, and I think it is definitely back in prime condition with the newer Resident Evil remakes and controversial, potentially the Silent Hill 2 remake, and things like Alan Wake as a newcomer and the Alone in the Dark remake. Let me know what you think, if you agree or disagree, and pop your opinions down in the comments below. I love survival horror, and I can't wait to see where survival horror is in another 20 years. Where do you think it'll be in another 20 years? This was just a quick video, guys, explaining my love for survival horror and why I think it's great. This is Dim Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.